Hello and welcome to Eavesdropping at the Movies. I'm Mike.
And I'm Jose.
We've seen Human Flow recently, which is the Weiwei. I didn't know how to pronounce his name before. I'd never heard anyone say it authoritatively, but he actually says it in the documentary. So it's Weiwei. So it's the Weiwei documentary about the refugee crisis worldwide, in which he's visited refugees at a number of locations and shows the kind of the similarities and the differences between them. I saw this on Friday a few days ago. You just saw it today.
Yes.
So maybe we'll start off with you because it's more fresh in your mind.
When I bought a cup of coffee, because I thought for a moment that you were coming. So I bought a cup of coffee waiting for you, and I was chatting to the man serving it. And he was saying, "Are you going to see Human Flow?" And I said, "Yes." And he goes, "Oh, and I said, "Why, is it no good?" And he said, "Oh, no, it's great, but you'll have to endure it," he said. And actually, I felt that there was an element of that. It's 2 hours and a half long, right? And it's misery upon misery upon misery that makes you feel like doing something. Actually, my overall feeling was that we went to see the Hanukkah yesterday. And which is all about kind of people living in Calais and and being completely immune to what's happening around them, and then here's this film that shows you what is happening around all of us actually, and it's happening in all these different parts of the world, and it's so cruel and unnecessary. It really reminded me, or it made me ask, do you want to be one of those people who did nothing during the Holocaust? When all these Jews were being shipped to America and England, do you want to be, part of that population that didn't help, that didn't contribute, that caused death? That's the feeling that it left me with.
I think it gave me that feeling at the time. I can't say it's endured particularly. I haven't really thought about it since. It's only been a few days. Maybe it's. I didn't know it was about more than the Syrian refugee crisis. I thought it was going to be about that. I don't know why, but Weiwei visits refugees in Malaysia, Gaza as well.
Yes,
and so they're not exactly refugees, but
Malaysia, Gaza, Afghanistan. He's in Greece. He's in Turkey. He's in Mexico and the Mexican-U.S. border. The hotspot refugee crisis points. He's in Hungary.
Yeah. But also, so Mexico and Gaza aren't really refugee crises, but they're oppressed peoples or peoples being mistreated.
Well, there are people left homeless, which is kind of where a refugee crisis begins, right? So, and I found it so sad, and I found it particularly sad because the images were so beautiful and very potent. There's an image of the oil fields burning up in Iraq, I think, with a cow full of soot, and with very dried up tits, kind of just walking through what looks like a deserted town as these piles of smoke flow overhead. I thought it was very striking and telling. There's also a corpse of a young woman with her hand outstretched, in the desert, who's clearly been, shot, and there's just a kind of a brutal image that somehow it almost looks beautiful. It looks like something that's done for some macabre, play or opera or something, except that it's real, right? So kind of, the images in the film have that, they are aestheticized. They are kind of in many ways beautiful images of disaster.
What I was given to notice was how similar the refugee camps were all over the place.
Yes.
Like it kind of, the film draws a visual, parallel between kind of displaced peoples, no matter where they're from or where they are, because they all end up in the same situation, in the same, kind of rows of tents. These kind of mass, like there are tens of thousands of people in some of these places, and they're all struggling for the same things and trying to get, trying to cross the same borders or in the same ways. And
yes,
it actually unites them, in a way that in the media, I guess they tend not to be. It's like there's a refugee crisis here or refugee crisis here, and they feel separate. And politically and in various ways, obviously they are separate, but there are uniting factors, there are commonalities between all of them.
I felt kind of so angry, actually specifically at the UK, because it's my understanding that this country is the one that has taken in the least number, right? I think something like 70,000, as opposed to the several million that have gone into Lebanon, the millions that are in Turkey, the million that Merkel accepted, right, into Germany. So you have like this great worldwide humanitarian crisis, to a large extent, greatly caused by the UK, right, and its involvement in the Iraq War, its kind of, support of the US in Afghanistan. These in many ways are all man-made disasters, and I thought it was kind of interesting that at the same time that this huge humanitarian crisis is happening, we have Brexit, right? Which, wants to kick out the people that are already here, much less, kind of help the ones who have found themselves, for reasons to a large extent caused by the UK, homeless and stateless. I wouldn't say that it kind of it transformed me into La Passionaria or something, but it did make me think of all of those things.
Transformed you into what?
La Passionaria, she was like, the communist female leader who inspired, the left in the Spanish Civil War.
Oh, right. I think what you say about the use of imagery is right, although I did feel that a lot of it was, I don't know, kind of pedestrian almost. There's also a lot of focus on talking heads, because Weiwei is going around the world interviewing people and asking them about their situation. So there's not a lot of kind of creative imagery and talking to someone whose face is in front of the camera. But to an extent, I felt the film really felt like an extended sort of panorama special or something like that, like Tonight Trevor McDonald.
No, I don't agree. I mean, I think there were some extraordinary images. There was one of the images in a camp, I forget which one, because, like you said, they end up all seeming similar, and there are so many in this film. But there's an amazing shot, which is taken, it must have been in a balloon or something.
Oh, I think I do a lot with drone imagery, where the camera lowers to come down toward the ground.
So, you see something that looks like a cartoon, and that then might look like ants in a desert. And, and then the closer it gets, you actually see people running.
That occurred to me because I thought, actually, that's what people really, really take object to a lot is the description of migrants as swarms.
Well, that's right.
But then this shot, they look like ants. Actually, it's slightly sped up as well, because obviously the camera took such a long time to descend. They sped up the shot, and so the people that you see move more quickly. And again, that more makes them resemble insects.
I don't know, because so you get that shot where they are made to seem like insects, and the kids kind of running away, and actually, police or, camp officials creating a circle around this thing to put them away. But then actually you do go into faces, so these things that are like termites or insects from far away become people, and I think actually that is one of the motifs in the film. Weiwei is fantastic at humanizing people, at kind of at talking to them on their own level, at joking with them, at even bargaining, right? So, he's buying fruit in one of the camps, and, the guy selling it to him is trying to trick him with like half rotten fruit, and he catches him, and they have this banter, and, it's very humanizing, because he both understands why this person would do it, but is very careful to get his exact change back and to make him exchange the fruit, and the seller laughs, right? So there are lots of moments of human connection, of humanizing people, really.
Yeah, you're right about that. Actually, it hadn't really occurred to me, but I was thinking, I was wondering how before I saw the film how much of a kind of star almost Weiwei would be in the film. You know, how much he would impose himself on it, and he shows up and he's obviously talking to people, but he's not in it all the time. But as you say, actually what he does is have basically no trouble talking to people, and he connects with them immediately.
Yes.
And these are people who you've been taught by the media to ignore and think of as non-human or subhuman.
Yes.
And he just effortlessly is just sort of saying, well, clearly they're not. I'm talking to them.
And he's so interesting because he's so quiet. He's got kind of this rambling walk, you know, so he's quite fat. He's got a belly, right? And then he's got a very quiet face, like, you know, he's not one of those people pleasers, I suppose, like me, really, that, you know, can't bear like an empty, the conversations always have to be full of sound, right? No, he allows for silence, right? And he's calm with it, you know, and yet he can engage kind of everybody, really. And it's very sympathetic. I found so many scenes so moving. There's one where a woman is talking, but you just see her back, and she signals that she just can't go on, and he goes and talks to her. Right. There's another scene where he films a young man from a fence, and basically, you know, and the young man asks him, you know, what are you doing about this, or something like that? Is there no place we can go? You know, and he's very calm, very handsome. There are so many incidents, you know, where he humanizes people, really. I kind of, you know, he films a scene with two brothers crying, right? Because they've obviously gotten themselves in this mess. They can't stay home. They don't know where to go, right? And it's almost like the older brother has ruined the younger brother's life in attempting this journey. I found it very moving, you know.
The scene where I think the father of a family is counting out the members of his family that he's lost, their photos and their ID cards he's got with him, and he's going through them like they're a deck of cards. There's so many of them.
Yes. So, you know, he lost 5 people, you know, and then he has this really like wonderful bit of dialogue where, you know, it's a kind of thing where art and magic and superstition, you know, a way of making sense of the world that is outside reason, because reason can't explain what he's experiencing. Where he talks about, you know, how the dead come to him in dreams, and, you know, and he can't shake them off, and they tell him what to do. I thought that was all like kind of...
It's terribly moving. Like
yeah. So, and all very beautiful, you know, I can't underline that enough. So, you know, the shots of the desert are like fantastic. The shots of the sea are just beautiful, you know, so kind of amidst all this beautiful scenery, there are scenes of destruction, you know, there are scenes of like homes completely destroyed, of just kind of the shells remaining, kind of people piling up furniture that at one time they must have taken pride in, because it's all full of like really ugly and excessive and a bit tacky, you know, guilt everywhere, right? You know, I think the contrast between those things and kind of people just wanting to make a life, you really get the feeling in the film that people have just fled, right? And actually there's a wonderful conversation with 2 women, well 3, you know, because they have a young girl with them. You know, one is quite elderly, like, you know, in her 60s, seemingly. The other one is maybe in her late 30s or 40s or something, somewhere around that range, you know, and they were saying, well, what are your plans? And they say, well, we have no plans. Our plan was just to leave, right? Like, you know, you know, so they were saying, well, the borders closed down and so on. And it made me feel really sad, because, you know, the film goes to some trouble to point out that the Human Rights Convention on Refugees was a European invention, right? And that since 1986, the countries creating physical barriers around the world, which didn't exist before, has risen from 12 to 70, you know, with most of them being in Europe. And it just it made me think, because, you know, it's hard to think of anybody in Europe that hasn't had an experience of migration that touches very close I mean, I know that England might be seen as an exception, but for example, a lot of kids who grew up in the Second World War kind of, they all had to be packed off somewhere else, right? So lucky for them, it wasn't another country, though for some it was another country. A lot of kids were packed off to Canada and to the US and so on. So, to know how tragic that is and to permit it to happen, I think is just,
Oh, sorry.
you know,
It's funny. That reminds me of something, which is the film. The film does a lot with intertitles, or well, not intertitles, but superimposed text at points. A lot of it is poetry.
Yes.
It opens though with the definition of refugee, which I've just looked up here. The definition of refugee as defined by the 1951 Refugee Convention. The quote is, "A person who, owing to a well-founded fear of being persecuted for reasons of race, religion, nationality, membership of a particular social group or political opinion, is outside the country of his nationality and is unable, or owing to such fear, is unwilling to avail himself of the protection of that country, or who, not having a nationality and being outside the country of his former habitual residence, as a result of such events, is unable, or owing to such fear, is unwilling to return to it." The film contracts that slightly, but that's the full definition. And I thought actually that actually leaves out a lot of the people who are refugees being shown in this film, because what it doesn't mention is being displaced simply by war.
Oh,
actually,
I think that's implicit in
I think it's implicit, but I think it's not actually. I mean, like a lot of these people aren't going to be persecuted just on the basis of their race, nationality, or beliefs. Although a lot are, but a lot of them have just been moved simply because it's not safe for them and they can't survive there. Yes. There's a war's taking place. And I thought actually, it seemed to be showing up. This was a slightly out of date definition. It seemed to me.
I don't know. I mean,
because also what's going to happen in the future is the environmental crisis are going to get to a point where it's displacing people because simply climate change is going to mean they can't live where they live.
Yes.
And this is going to get worse and worse and worse. And that's, I mean, if war is implicit in that, environmental change is certainly not implicit in that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, environmental change is very clearly made a factor in the film, right? Because, huge migrations in Africa are taking place because of environmental change. But anyway, I mean, kind of, whether it should have a more expansive notion, I'm not sure.
Well, no, it's the film that does. I mean, that's what I mean. I think actually the definition provided by the UN Convention is less expansive than the film. I think actually the film is showing up that some ideas of what a refugee is or what these people's status is outdated.
Well, I'm not sure because I actually don't remember the film making that point, right? So kind of what the film does is show various refugee crises from around the globe, kind of how it's been pointed out by the press. So it's an issue that everybody should know about, really. So you can't claim ignorance. Like it has been covered in almost every media outlet. And then the inadequacy, really the selfishness of countries' responses to it, right? So, and the various international committees or people involved on an international level, who are doing what they can to help but are being frustrated from helping in the ways that they could.
Yeah.
Right. The prime instance here being Hungary building a wall, right? And also, the film highlights the politicking around it. So, the deal made with Turkey and the EU, that involves transfers of money, but what it excludes is actually, the refugees themselves, really. That's what it excludes. So...
Yeah, well, that deals along the lines of we'll take so many if we can have free movement of our people to Europe or something like that.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, no, we will accept $6 billion
right.
in exchange for several million of our people, having entry to Europe. But in the meantime, the refugees are in a camp. So, they just agreed to keep the refugees in the camp while their own people get, migrant status in Europe. That was my understanding of it, at any rate.
Vaguely remember. There's a lot of detail in that. There's a lot of. I mean, the numbers kind of they start to wash over you for a while. The number of people kept in various camps, and these numbers are vast.
Yes.
They're in the tens of thousands, sometimes the hundreds of thousands, and at one point, is it? Oh, I can't. Is it Lebanon maybe, where the guy's talking about there are 1.6 million here?
A third of the population in Lebanon is now made up of refugees, right? So, I mean, the situation in Lebanon is dire. The situation in Turkey, the situation in Greece. I mean, all of those countries that have, for one reason or another, and often in spite of their own wishes, have been landed with all of these people in their shores. And I think kind of, that the international community should really be ashamed of themselves, really. And the risks of not doing something about that is one of the things that the film highlights very clearly as well. Right, kind of these kids aren't being educated. They aren't going to school. You just see a young boy reading the Quran. Right, they have nowhere to go and they have nothing to do except plan to leave.
What did you think of the film's use of poetry?
Oh, I loved it.
Yeah.
I mean, yes, I did because I can't remember much of it.
No, there's a lot. There's quite varying use of poetry. There's some kind of 20th century poets, and there are a lot from hundreds or thousands of years ago.
Yes.
Sort of from China and Persia and places like that. But it's all the poetry is. As you say, I can't remember a single bit of it. And I'd like to see the film again for that reason. But I remember it all feeling so, kind of perfectly apt and expressive. And
yes.
Like almost these Zen cones that just a line or two it'll show you that just expresses some idea so perfectly.
Yes. Also, what I thought was good about it is that he takes, Sufi poetry or poetry from Turkey or Iraq or, Kurdish poets or whatever. Yeah, so he's kind of using, the poetry of these various nationalities, to express, what those peoples in general are undergoing at the moment. And I think it's very beautiful. And there is something like, part of the way that I think the film humanizes these swarms, is by, introducing them in a personal way sometimes, and then kind of rendering what they say both concrete and ineffable. Yeah, that you always have the feeling that there's something more behind it, that there's more, kind of, that you're only getting the tip of an iceberg of what a person is going through, right? And actually the most telling thing for me was when they said that it takes something like, I forget whether it was 26 or 31 years.
I don't remember.
For a refugee to be rehomed.
Right.
Right. Yes. The average time that a person who is forced out of their own country due to war, it really takes between, I forget whether it was 26 or 31 years to resettle.
Half a lifetime.
Yeah, so their lives are ruined. They have no future. And actually, this thing about kind of, people with no future is an idea that's hammered home in all kinds of different ways, including, I thought a very lovely one where, a young teenage girl who's 13 or 14 or maybe 15, in that age range, interviews, and then she's asked about what her experience of the camps is. And she says, I'm so bored. My brother is bored, my aunt is bored, my whole family's bored, right? And you get the sense that on the one hand, it's an archetypal teen experience of just being bored with the world, right? But also, that she's going to be trapped in that state much longer than anybody else.
I think that, just return to the poetry briefly, I think the other thing that it does, thinking about it, is it, by using poetry from hundreds or thousands of years ago, as you say, from these places, it contextualises the struggle. There's this ongoing kind of eternal human one. This isn't a new thing. The problems that these people have deep down are the problems that everyone has been struggling for, which is essentially, and it all comes down to sort of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and just the ability to live a free life.
Yes. I think what it also does, that use of poetry, it it makes people human because it's often about feeling. Yeah, it personalizes. But also what it does is it puts people in the context of a culture. These are civilized people. You know, they're not just like some barbarian nameless swarm. Yeah, they're people with a culture and a history, you know, and also they're unique and individual part of this culture and this history, and often very ancient civilizations.
I was going to say, very often actually longer histories than ours in the West.
That's right. So not offering them a lifeline at a time of need seems just really like sinful, you know.
So not respecting you, Mum.
Actually, that notion of respect is one that crops up in conversation throughout the film.
Yeah.
Yes, you know, with Weiwei saying, you know, I respect you, and you know, and I respect your passport, because actually, that's also kind of part of the problem.
Yes, he swaps passports with the one guy.
Yeah,
and it's just an issue of respect. It's about equality and just saying to someone, I see who you are, and I take
those moments are often slightly dangerous, because you know the thing is that Weiwei is an artist, and he often does things that you think is a bit maybe touchy-feely, that it might be more appropriate to a happening, you know, or a performance art piece than it actually, you know, is, you know, in a camp. And on the other hand, he looks slightly ridiculous, and yet these things work, you know.
I expected it to feel more like it was... I don't know what my impression of Weiwei was before the film, but I guess I expected there to feel more like stunts almost.
Yes.
Which is not really my impression. I mean, like, I understand that he's a serious person he's been through been through a persecution of his own.
Yes.
Where he was jailed. I was ultimately what I'm saying is I was pleasantly surprised that his personality was not sort of the defining feature of the film.
No, though he's always there and he's always present.
Yes.
And actually he's a very calming, you know, wise presence that, you know, is very almost placidly questioning. Yeah, because he does have a kind of a placid persona. Yeah, he's always quiet.
He's a very good listener.
Yes.
It's a trick. It was a secret almost to kind of interviewing, really. It's just you shut up and listen, and people fill silences. You know, if you just stop asking questions and just wait for them to speak, people will offer you things, and usually that's when they offer the deepest insights into themselves or into what they think. And Weiwei does that. He's just patient, and he listens, and he wants to hear what people have to say. Yes,
I think by doing that, you know, he makes the audience listen to what people have to say, and you know, he does offer them a platform and a voice and a way of getting, you know, these voices heard in a way that is very, very beautiful. I think the combination of, you know, the poetry, you know, and then just the astonishing visual quality of some of those images. They're very poetic images, I find, you know, and then of a marvelous technical quality.
Yes.
Right.
Well, and again, we saw it on the 4K projector at the Mac, which just made it look astonishing.
Yes, I'm a convert to the Mac. You know, I think kind of, you know, that was very, very beautiful. But it was an endurance. You know, it was a bit of an endurance test.
A little bit, but I think that's more because I don't think it was endurance insofar as it felt like torture to watch these things.
No, it did not feel.
But it's because I think because of the lack of a plot, you just never really are sure where it's going to end.
That's right.
So you kind of, because it could realistically end at so many points.
It made me slightly ashamed, you know, because you go through Myanmar, and you know, then you go through Qatar and Syria and Afghanistan. You know, and then you think it's over, but it's not over,
No.
right? Then it goes to Turkey, and then it goes to, you know, and then you think, oh, it's over, and then no, it's not over.
The film actually
Lebanon.
migrates its way into Europe.
Yeah.
You end up in Europe, and actually right at the end you end up in Mexico.
That's right.
Talking about the kind of the wall.
Yeah, so
that is a bit of a stunt, Mexico. Where because and actually it's shown to be really is they're hanging around by the Mexico America
Yes.
border, and they're basically showing that it's really porous
Yes.
and it's not as strong as they like to think. And this bloke on a quad bike shows up and says, "Yeah, how long are you going to be here?" And he says, "We're going to be here about 30 minutes." And he says, "Okay, well, you just want to make sure to stay that side of the fence. No, it's not a fence. That's that side of the post. There's no fence." And he just says, because this side's the USA and that side's Mexico, and it shows up to be this kind of stupid. Basically, the idea of a border is kind of stupid, right there. But it is also a stunt, because Weiwei then goes back to his crew and he says, "Yeah, we got it. I was mic'd up and everything."
Yeah.
It's like we just wanted him to say that stupid thing about there being a border, or whatever.
Yeah.
That's a bit of a stunt.
Yes. Yes. And I must say, I can understand why the Mexico-US thing is put over, particularly with Trump's insistence on putting up a fence, right? But on the other hand, it did feel categorically different.
Yes,
I
agree.
Than all the
and the tone of it is different to the rest of the film as well.
Yeah, the
it feels
Africans
out
being
of
washed
place.
up in boats and not surviving, and like a woman weighing 36 kilos, or like it's just not the same, or it doesn't feel the same. I mean, maybe it is the same, and the film doesn't explain why it's the same as well as it should. But that felt like the film would have been better without that bit.
Yeah. I mean, ultimately, the difference is that people coming into the US from Mexico, or people wanting to come into the US from Mexico, are not refugees. They're immigrants. There is a difference. Now, a lot of them, very often it's illegal immigration, which is what America is so kind of
I'm not
fired
sure.
up about.
I'm not sure. I kind of, I'd like to complicate that actually, because, the way that I mean, Mexico in many ways is a failed state. There are entire areas that are being gang run,
Right.
And kind of, so I think there are reasons for people fleeing. Now, I suppose, you could argue that they could travel south, if they're being persecuted out of their homes and jobs and money, which is happening, and but there might be reasons why they can't go south. So I just don't know.
Yeah, no, well, fair enough.
I mean, I'm just saying that
it's
there
not as
are
simple
real.
as it seems.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and there are kind of many reasons why it might very well belong, in this context. But the film didn't explain it well enough, and it felt categorically different.
And it was very brief.
Yeah,
Spent almost no time there.
Yeah.
Do you think the film suffers for lack of seeking solutions to the problems?
No, I don't. Though it's kind of, though it might. I mean, there is a tradition in film, and actually just in Western cultures, that somehow people being aware of the problem is the spark to resolve it. Yeah. And I'm not sure I believe that any longer, right? Like, we know what's happening, right? So I think it's not enough to know. I think works of this kind also need to be able to tell people or show people how to help. My first impulse, in doing this was, who do I give money to, right, to help, right? So that, kind of, and I actually wish that the film would have offered a kind of a pathway, not necessarily only to give money, but maybe to help, because it does assume that once people know how terrible the situation is, that's kind of like the beginnings of change. And I suppose you could argue that you do have to know about something before you can act on it. But on the other hand, I also think that we do know, and people are not acting, right? So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. That it ends with an interview with, I think it was Syria's first astronaut.
Yes.
Who talks about seeing the Earth from space. I forget exactly what he says, but it's along the lines of seeing how everyone was the same from up that high.
Yes.
And how we need to take these racists and send them into space.
Yes.
Ultimately.
Yes.
Which is a nice sort of double entendre.
Yes.
Um,
and how it is one world that we're sharing. I think, I think theoretically that's all true. And I think the film raises interesting problems about the future, because, I mean, the population does keep increasing. Global warming is raising all kinds of all kinds of changes and displacements and so on. So I think we are going to have to find a different way of, living together in this world, or it's going to be found for us. But next time we might be the Syrians.
Well, yeah, I mean, the world will carry on, that's for sure. It's just
Yeah.
whether how humans will carry on it.
Yes. So, anyway, I enjoyed seeing it very much, and I was particularly struck by the beauty of the images.
Mm.
Worth seeing.
Yes, worth seeing, that's for sure.